There is a place on this earth where the trees look like they were designed by someone who had never seen a tree before, where a forest, a real, living, breathing forest, bleeds red when you cut it, where the plants are so unusual, so unlike anything found anywhere else on the planet, that scientists genuinely cannot agree on how they got there or why they evolved the way they did. This isn't a render. This isn't a film set. This is a real island with real people living on it right now. And almost nobody is talking about what's actually happening there. The island is called Socotra. And for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you somewhere that most travel content completely fails to capture. Because the story of Socotra isn't just about the trees. It's about a civilization that evolved in total isolation for longer than modern humans have existed. A language that was never written down. A tree that takes 50 years before it can even reproduce. A secret military occupation happening right now on a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And a crisis so slow and so quiet that by the time the world notices, it will already be too late. This is what it actually means to live here. Most people, when they first see a map with Socotra on it, assume it's just another island off the coast of Yemen. A small piece of land that split off at some point in recent geological history. That assumption is completely wrong. Socotra is not a volcanic island. It didn't form from an underwater eruption or a shifting tectonic plate cracking open. Socotra is a continental fragment, a piece of land so old it was once attached to the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana. The same landmass that would eventually split apart to become Africa, South America, Antarctica, India, and Australia. When Gondwana began breaking up, Socotra broke off and drifted into the Indian Ocean, alone, cut off from the rest of the world's land. And it stayed that way, isolated, evolving on its own, for somewhere between 6 and 20 million years. Think about what that means. For millions of years, life on Socotra had no contact with life anywhere else. No animals swimming over from Africa, no seeds blowing in from Arabia, no outside influence of any kind. Whatever lived on that island when it drifted away from Gondwana just kept evolving, alone, into something the rest of the world had never seen. The result of that isolation is what you're looking at right now. Today, 37% of all plant species on Socotra are endemic, meaning they exist nowhere else on Earth. 90% of its reptile species, 95% of its land snails, gone from the rest of the world entirely, surviving only here, on this single island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Socotra is geologically African, not Arabian. Even though it's administered by Yemen and sits closer to the Arabian Peninsula than to East Africa, the rock beneath your feet is part of the Somali tectonic plate. It belongs to Africa. The island is politically in one place and geologically in another. Even the Earth itself can't agree on where Socotra belongs. The island is about 132 kilometers long and sits in the northwest Indian Ocean near the Gulf of Aden, one of the most strategically important shipping routes in the world. Every day, enormous cargo ships and oil tankers pass within sight of this island, while its 50,000 residents live lives that have barely changed in centuries. We'll come back to why that shipping route matters, because that's where things get very complicated, very fast. But first, the trees. Because you cannot understand Socotra without understanding the dragon blood tree. And you cannot understand the dragon blood tree until you understand what it actually does and what is quietly happening to it right now. The dragon blood tree is called Dracaena cinnabari. It exists nowhere on Earth except this island, and when you cut it, when you slice into the bark, it bleeds, not metaphorically. The sap that flows from the wound is a deep, vivid red. So red it looks artificial. So red that for thousands of years, people who had never seen this tree before assumed it must be the literal blood of a dragon. And here's where the history gets strange. This sap, this dragon's blood, was one of the most prized trade commodities in the ancient world. It was carried along the incense road to ancient Greece and Rome. Roman physicians used it to treat respiratory problems and stomach disorders. Medieval European alchemists burned it in rituals, believing it had the power to amplify spells and ward off evil spirits. Artists ground it into pigment and used it to paint illuminated manuscripts. Some of the most important religious texts in European history have traces of Socotra tree sap in their colours. In the 18th century, Italian violin makers, the same craftsmen who made the instruments we now call priceless, used dragon's blood resin as a component in their varnish. When you listen to a Stradivarius, part of what you're hearing is the acoustic property of that varnish, and part of that varnish came from trees on this island. There was even an 18th century recipe for toothpaste that listed dragon's blood as an ingredient. The island's name itself may carry this history. One theory is that the Arabic word Socotra breaks down as souk, meaning market, and a derivative of katir, referring to dragon's blood. The island's name may literally mean the dragon's blood market. Now look at the tree itself, because the shape of it, that impossible umbrella, those branches spreading outward in perfect geometric symmetry, is not accidental. It is one of the most sophisticated pieces of biological engineering on the planet. The canopy acts as a living fog collector. In an environment that barely receives rain, where the sun beats down for months without relief, the flat umbrella crown intercepts moisture from the air. Mist and fog drift across the plateau, hit the canopy, and the water drips down the branches to the roots below. The tree doesn't just survive in a desert. It creates water in a desert. It manufactures its own water supply from fog, and then it shares that water. The ground beneath a dragon blood tree stays consistently more moist than the surrounding terrain. Other plants grow in its shade. Animals shelter under it. The entire ecosystem of the Dixam Plateau is built around these trees acting as water infrastructure. Remove the trees and the moisture disappears. The soil dries. The plants that sheltered beneath them die. The animals that depended on those plants move or starve. Within 1 or 2 generations, what was a plateau ecosystem becomes a desert. Which brings us to what's actually happening right now. And this is the part almost nobody is covering. The dragon blood trees are dying, and there are no babies. Scientists at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, have spent years surveying the forests of the Dixam Plateau. What they found is devastating. The existing forests are what biologists call over-mature. Every tree standing is old. Some of them are 500 years old or older. And beneath them, where there should be hundreds of seedlings, young trees fighting for space and light, there is almost nothing. Here is why. When a goat gets loose, it will eat almost anything. And at some point, settlers brought goats to Socotra. The goats multiplied. And goats, it turns out, love dragon blood tree seedlings. A seedling that took years to push up through the rocky soil gets eaten in seconds. The goats have been decimating every new generation of the forest before a single tree can grow tall enough to survive. The only place young dragon blood trees can survive uneaten is on cliff faces too steep for goats to reach. Everywhere else, the forest ages, the old trees die, and nothing replaces them. But the goat problem is only half of it. The dragonblood tree takes almost 50 years before it can reproduce. 50 years. That means even if every goat on the island disappeared tomorrow, even if perfect conditions returned overnight, you would have to wait half a century to know if the forest was recovering. And the climate isn't getting better. In 2015, 2 cyclones struck Socotra within days of each other. Cyclones rarely hit this island. The geography and wind patterns historically deflected them. But warming ocean temperatures are changing those patterns. The first storm, Cyclone Chapala, dumped more than 400 millimeters of rain on the arid western coast, more than the island typically receives in an entire year. Then Cyclone Meg arrived. It became the strongest cyclone ever to directly hit Socotra. Ancient trees that had stood for 5 centuries were uprooted and destroyed in hours. And because the trees grow only a few centimeters per year, because it takes 50 years just to reach reproductive age, those losses cannot simply be regrown. Once a 500-year-old dragonblood tree is gone, it's gone for centuries. Some families on the island are trying. Sina Kibani's family runs a small nursery where they protect seedlings behind handmade fences of wire and wood. She cradles a sapling that barely reaches her ankle. A few years' worth of growth, precious beyond measure. But here's the cruel reality. The nursery fences break. Goats see green vegetation and they break through. The nurseries collapse, and the resources to rebuild them, proper materials, proper funding, simply aren't available on an island where the majority of the population lives below the poverty line. Meanwhile, the Yemeni government, which technically administers Socotra, is absorbed by a decade-long civil war. When a government can barely provide water and electricity to its people, protecting trees is, as one analyst put it, an unattainable luxury. The dragonblood tree is currently listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. But some scientists believe that designation doesn't capture the actual speed of the collapse, because they're not just vulnerable, they're not regenerating. And without regeneration, the word you're looking for isn't vulnerable, it's terminal. Now, let's talk about the people, because Socotra gets covered as a nature documentary. The trees, the endemic species, the alien landscape, and the 50,000 human beings who live here, who have lived here for at least 3,000 years, are often treated as backdrop. They are not backdrop. What you just heard is the Socotri language, and it is one of the most remarkable things on this island. Socotri has no written form. It never developed one. For over 3,000 years, every story, every piece of knowledge, every history, every law, every medical tradition, everything this civilization knew, was held entirely in the memory of living people and passed from mouth to ear, generation to generation. Think about that for a moment. We have libraries, we have books, we have the internet. If every person who understood a particular skill died tomorrow, we could recover that knowledge from records. On Socotra, if the generation of elders who carry a particular piece of knowledge dies without passing it on, that knowledge is simply gone. It disappears from the earth. But the language itself is what truly staggers linguists. Socotri is classified as a modern South Arabian language, a family of languages related to, but distinctly different from, Arabic. Scholars who have spent careers studying it describe it as a linguistic time machine. Its roots are closer to the oldest written Semitic languages that died out thousands of years ago than to anything spoken anywhere in the world today. It preserves grammatical features that no longer exist in Arabic, Hebrew, or Aramaic. Features that were present in these languages in their most ancient forms, preserved here, on this island, by a community that never had any reason to change. The vocabulary is extraordinarily specific. There are distinct verbs in Socotra for to go, depending on the time of day. Different words for to give birth, depending on which animal is involved. The language doesn't generalize because it was built by people who needed precision, who lived and died by the specifics of weather, animals, tides, and seasons. The island's first recorded poet, the first person in Socotra's history we can name, is a 9th century woman named Fatima al-Sukutriya, a woman, in the 9th century. On an island that most of the world didn't know existed, she was composing poems in an oral tradition so rich that to this day, the island holds an annual poetry competition where residents compose and recite new works in Socotra. Not recite memorized old poems, write new ones. An oral literary tradition that has survived, unbroken, for over 1,000 years. The people of Socotra are primarily descended from the Al-Mahra tribe of southern Arabia, mixed with communities of East African descent and, historically, merchants from India and Balochistan who settled the coastal areas. The island sits at the crossroads of 3 continents, Africa, Arabia, and the Indian subcontinent, and its population reflects that. A 10th century Arab chronicler describes Socotra as a dangerous nest of pirates who ambush ships passing through the Indian Ocean. The island's position meant it was always part of global trade, even when it pretended not to be. Life on the island today runs on a pattern that has barely changed in centuries. Most Socotris are semi-nomadic pastoralists. They move with their goats. They fish the same waters their ancestors fished. They build shelters in the highlands during the monsoon season. When winds off the Indian Ocean reach such ferocity that the island is cut off from the outside world for months at a time, the monsoon doesn't just bring rain. It brings winds so intense that no boat can approach the shore, no plane can safely land. For roughly 5 months every year, whatever is on Socotra stays on Socotra. No supply ships, no outside medicine, no relief. The diet reflects the isolation. Goat meat, fish, dates, camel milk, and whatever can be grown in small household gardens. Agriculture in the traditional sense, the kind that requires irrigation and stable soil, is almost impossible here. The rocky terrain and the months of scorching dry heat make it non-viable. So the island has always eaten what the island produces, which means when the monsoon cuts off supply routes, there is no backup. Outside the capital city of Hadibu, most villages have no running water, no reliable electricity beyond diesel generators that may or may not have fuel. Medical care is limited, and yet when visitors come, when strangers arrive from the outside world, Socotri hospitality is described universally as overwhelming. You are fed. You are given tea. You are welcomed into homes that have almost nothing by people who offer everything they have. One traveller who visited the island described being taken in by a local guide who sang Socotri songs all day while driving across the rocky plateaus. The guide explained, "People on the island sing because they don't have electricity outside Hadibu. Singing fills the silence. It always has. There's a detail about Socotra's history that almost never appears in travel content, and it deserves more attention. For over 1,000 years, the people of Socotra were Christians, not Muslim, not pagan, Christian, a form of Nestorian Christianity that had reached the island through ancient trade routes connecting them to the wider world. The island had bishops. It had Christian communities. It maintained that faith for centuries while the rest of Arabia converted to Islam around it. And then, in the 17th century, Christianity disappeared from Socotra. Completely. Vanished. The island converted to Islam, and no one fully understands how or why the transition happened the way it did. There are no surviving churches, no written records of the conversion, no monuments. Whatever happened, happened in a community that kept its history in human memory, not on paper. And that memory, on this specific point, didn't survive. An entire millennium of religious history gone. This is the part of the Socotra story that almost no travel content, no nature documentary, no YouTube video about the island bothers to include. In 2018, more than 100 soldiers from the United Arab Emirates arrived in Socotra. They came on military transport aircraft. They brought tanks. They brought armoured vehicles. And when they landed, they dismissed Yemeni soldiers from the airport and the seaport. They raised the Emirati flag over government buildings in Hadibu. The Yemeni government, the internationally recognised government that Socotra legally belongs to, called it, in an official statement, an act of aggression. The United States said it was closely following the situation. Turkey expressed serious concern. The UAE said it was just there to help. To understand why a small island in the Indian Ocean suddenly became a military flashpoint, you have to zoom out. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the narrow choke point between Yemen and East Africa, is one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. Approximately 30% of the world's oil passes through it. Container ships, tankers, cargo vessels, trillions of dollars of global trade every year moves through this stretch of water. Whoever controls the waters around Socotra controls the approach to that strait. The UAE understood this, and in the context of the Yemen civil war, which the UAE was a participant in, ostensibly fighting alongside Saudi Arabia against the Houthi movement, Socotra wasn't just a nature reserve. It was a real estate opportunity in one of the most valuable pieces of ocean on Earth. What has happened since 2018 is extraordinary. The UAE built a military base on Socotra. It constructed a communications network. It conducted its own census of the island's residents, a census not authorized by Yemen. It offered Socotri residents UAE work permits, free healthcare, and Emirati cell phone plans linked to the UAE network, not the Yemeni one. It reportedly recruited 900 young men from the island, paid them to move to the Emirates, creating a financial dependency that tied their families' livelihoods to Abu Dhabi. And on Abd al-Khuri, the second largest island in the Socotra archipelago, sitting directly in the approach to the Gulf of Aden, satellite imagery analysed by multiple intelligence outlets shows a fully operational military airstrip, capable of handling heavy transport aircraft and strategic bombers, built from scratch since 2021. For all practical purposes, the UAE now controls what happens on Socotra. The island is still technically administered by the Southern Transitional Council, a Yemeni separatist group that is itself UAE-backed. Yemeni citizens from the mainland are reportedly denied access to their own island. Tourists from the Gulf arrive on 2-hour direct flights from Abu Dhabi, bypassing Yemeni immigration systems entirely. The Socotri people themselves are not uniformly happy about this. Protests have taken place in Hadibu. Residents have spoken out against the transformation of their homeland into a military and economic hub for a foreign power that has no historical connection to the island. But here's the bitter irony that closes this circle. The UAE's rushed construction projects to build infrastructure, tourism facilities, and military installations. The same projects happening on one of the most biodiversity-rich UNESCO World Heritage Sites on Earth are themselves a threat to the ecosystem. Reports document overfishing by UAE-linked vessels in Socotra waters, illegal trade in endemic species, increased waste and pollution, construction on protected land. The trees are dying from climate change, from invasive goats, from a cash-strapped government too distracted by war to protect them. And now, the island itself is being quietly absorbed by a regional power that sees a strategic asset, not a treasure. Nobody watching a pretty drone video of dragon blood trees on Instagram knows any of this is happening. There's one more thing about Socotra that almost never gets mentioned, and it's arguably the strangest of all. The island is riddled with caves. A dense, extensive network of underground cave systems runs beneath the rocky plateau, carved out over millions of years by water moving through the limestone bedrock. And the vast majority of these caves have never been explored. Scientists know they exist. They can map the openings from above. But what's inside them? What creatures have been evolving in the darkness of these caves, in complete isolation, for millions of years, is almost entirely unknown. The above-ground ecosystem of Socotra already has undiscovered species. A 2016 genetic survey of the island's reptiles found unexpectedly high levels of what biologists call cryptic diversity, meaning there are lizards and geckos on this island that look identical to known species, but are genetically distinct enough to be entirely separate species. Species that are technically new to science, hiding in plain sight. If the surface has that many undiscovered species, what's underground? The honest scientific answer is, we don't know. The cave systems are difficult to access. The island is politically unstable and logistically challenging to reach. Research funding goes to the surface, to the trees, to the birds, to the reptiles people can photograph. The darkness underground is a scientific frontier that for now remains almost entirely unexplored. What we do know is that cave environments on isolated oceanic islands, places where species have been cut off from the surface world for millions of years, tend to produce some of the most bizarre life forms on Earth. Blind fish, eyeless spiders, creatures that have adapted to a world with no light, no seasons, no weather. Socotra's caves could contain species that make the dragon blood tree look ordinary by comparison, and they may disappear before anyone ever finds them. We talked earlier about the Socotra language, about how it has no written form, how it preserves grammatical features that died out in other Semitic languages thousands of years ago, how it's carried entirely in the minds of living people. Here is what's happening to it right now. The official language of Socotra's schools is Arabic. Children are educated in Arabic. Government business happens in Arabic. The island's connection to the outside world, through television, through mobile phones, through social media, happens in Arabic. And young people, pragmatically, are shifting to Arabic. Because Arabic is useful in the modern world. Arabic gets you work in the Gulf. Arabic is the language of the internet they're suddenly connected to. Socotra, beautiful, ancient, irreplaceable Socotra, is becoming the language of grandparents. A researcher who visited the island describes sitting with an elderly couple in the hills. The man, Nihamalha, and his wife Metagal, spoke in Socotra about their lives. In a language, the researcher noted, whose origins are lost in time, unchanged for centuries, understood today by fewer people than live in Ames, Iowa. Ames, Iowa. That is how many people in the world speak this language, a language that preserves the deep linguistic history of the entire Semitic language family, the family that includes Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic. A language that scholars say helps us understand the biblical world and ancient Arabia. Spoken by fewer people than a mid-sized American college town. Russian linguists have been working for years to create a written form of Socotra, adding new letters to the Arabic alphabet to represent the sounds unique to this language. It's an extraordinary act of linguistic preservation. But there's a painful irony in it. The moment you write down an oral language, you've already acknowledged that oral transmission has failed. You're building an archive, not a living tradition. The annual poetry competition, where Socotris compose and recite new poems in their language, is one of the most important acts of cultural resistance happening anywhere on Earth right now. It keeps the language alive as a creative medium, not just a relic. But every year, the number of young people participating is a question. Let me try to paint a picture of what daily life actually looks like on Socotra. Not the drone footage, not the tourist experience, the actual texture of being alive on this island. You wake before dawn because the sun rises around 5 in the morning and the day gets hot very quickly. If you live outside Hadibu, outside the capital, which is where most people do live, there is no electricity grid. Maybe a generator, if you have fuel, which you may not. The darkness before dawn is complete. The stars overhead are extraordinary. No light pollution, no ambient glow from any city, nothing but the Milky Way in full display over the Indian Ocean. Your livelihood probably involves one of 3 things: goats, fish, or dates. Maybe all 3. Goats are everything here. They provide milk, meat, and a form of currency. They're also, as we now know, destroying the forest. But they've been central to Socotra survival for so long that the relationship is inseparable. A Socotra family's wealth is measured in goats. Telling someone to get rid of their goats is like telling them to burn their savings. If you live on the coast, you fish. Traditional methods, passed down through generations, knowledge held in family lines. The waters around Socotra are extraordinarily rich. 253 species of reef-building corals, 730 species of coastal fish, 300 species of crab, lobster, and shrimp. The sea here is one of the most biodiverse marine environments in the Indian Ocean. Fishermen know which waters, which seasons, which methods. It's specialized knowledge that took centuries to develop. During the monsoon, roughly May through September, the winds are too strong to fish. The island closes. Ships don't come. Planes struggle to land. For those months, you live on what you've stored, what you've preserved, what the island provides. Outside the capital, there is no running water. Women and girls walk to water sources, springs, cisterns, collection points, carrying what the family needs. Roads are recent. The island had almost no paved roads until very recently. Even now, there is only one real asphalt road running along the coast. The interior of the island, the plateau, the mountains, the places where the dragon blood trees grow, is accessible only by 4-wheel drive vehicles or on foot. Medical care is limited to Hadibu and a handful of smaller clinics. If you need surgery, you need to leave the island. If you need to leave during monsoon season, if you have an emergency, if something goes wrong, the timing has to work with the weather, not with your medical need. And yet, travelers who come here describe something that sounds, at first, almost impossible to reconcile with everything I've just told you. They describe a quality of life, a quality of presence, of community, of connection to the physical world that they've never encountered anywhere else. There is no abstract stress on Socotra, no commute, no office politics, no social media anxiety. Life is immediate. The concerns are immediate: food, water, weather, family, community. The problems are real and solvable, or they're real and not solvable, and either way you live with them in the company of people who have lived with the same problems for 3,000 years. One visitor described being invited to a village poetry recitation, where the entire community gathered in the mountains to compose and share poems in Socotra. No phones, no recordings, just voices in the dark, in a language older than writing, on an island older than human civilization. He said it was the most alive he had ever felt. The dragon blood tree has survived on this island for millions of years. It survived the ice ages. It survived isolation. It survived the first humans who arrived and began cutting it down for its resin. It survived the Portuguese, who occupied the island briefly in the 16th century. It survived the British, who sought to buy it in 1834 and eventually placed it under their protection. It survived the Cold War, when Soviet troops camped on its beaches. What it may not survive is the convergence of everything happening right now. Climate change bringing cyclones to an island that wasn't designed to receive them. Invasive goats eating every new generation of trees. A government too consumed by war to enforce protections. A military occupation that is building infrastructure across a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And a population whose traditional conservation practices developed over thousands of years of living alongside this ecosystem, are eroding as the modern world arrives in the form of smartphones, Arabic education, and Gulf work permits. The trees don't know any of this. They stand on the plateau, as they always have, collecting fog, creating water, shading the ground beneath them, in their peculiar, patient, alien way. A 500-year-old tree doesn't experience urgency. It doesn't feel crisis. It just stands there, 50 years between each chance to reproduce, while the world changes at speeds it was never designed to keep up with. The Socotra people know what's happening. They've watched it for decades. They have words for the parts of the forest that are gone. They remember where trees stood that stood no longer. Their traditional ecological knowledge, the understanding of how this ecosystem works, built up over 3,000 years of living inside it, is among the most detailed and accurate assessments of the island's environmental health that exists anywhere. And that knowledge, like the language it lives in, is also disappearing. I started this video by saying that Socotra is the most alien-looking place on Earth, that scientists can't fully explain its trees. That's true. But what I hope you're taking away from this is that the strangeness of Socotra isn't just aesthetic. It's not just a place that looks weird on a postcard. Socotra is the result of 20 million years of life evolving in isolation. It is a living record of what the planet looked like before humans arrived in force. It contains species, above ground and below it, that exist nowhere else, and that we are only beginning to understand. It is home to a people who built a civilization without writing it down, whose language holds secrets about the history of human language that we have nowhere else to find. And it is quietly, steadily, being lost. The trees won't disappear overnight. The language won't vanish in a year. These things move on the timescale of decades, of generations. That's what makes them easy to ignore and catastrophic to lose. What I think about is that child running under the canopy of a dragon blood tree, playing in the shade of something 500 years old. In a few decades, if nothing changes, those trees will be dead and nothing will have replaced them. That shade will be gone. The water that those trees collected from the fog, gone. The ecosystem that depended on them, gone. And if the child's parents haven't passed on the Socotra language, and if the language isn't written down anywhere, that voice, that poetry competition, that 1,000-year oral tradition, also gone. Socotra has always been at the edge of the world, remote enough that most of what happens there goes unnoticed. Maybe that's what this video is for. If you've made it this far, you now know things about this island that most people, including most people writing about it, don't know. Share it. Talk about it. Because the first step toward not losing something extraordinary is knowing that it exists, and it does. Out there in the Indian Ocean, between Africa and Arabia, an island bleeds red, speaks in a language older than writing, and stands on rock that remembers a world before continents. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next adventure. From hidden gems to unforgettable destinations, there's always another story waiting just around the corner. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep traveling. See you in the next adventure.